Welcome to DevExSec. Thanks everybody for coming. Now, just a quick intro for myself. My name is Coleman. I run marketing here at Hoop Dev, and I'm going to cede the floor to Andreas Robert, my CEO and founder. Let's do it.
All right, so very excited to introduce this new concept. We've seen a lot of resonance with our the companies that we work with. We talked with a lot of industry leaders, and we've seen a lot of this theme picking up as we've seen the DevOps movement, and then SRE, DevSecOps, and now platform engineering morphing to a combination of initiatives within the most advanced organization. So we're super excited to talk about how we are seeing leaders make a bigger impact by making autonomy something that's secure and at the same time very focused on developer experience, and how is security playing a big role in the bottlenecks that we see these days inside organizations and how we can get rid of them. So thank you everyone for joining, and I'm not sure if Cole brought that up, but feel free to drop questions. We should be answering them live. We would love to make this more conversational, but we prepared some very exciting material here to share with you, some very interesting data that we collected from the market. And yeah, drop questions if you want, and we will answer them promptly or save them for the end if it makes more sense. Yeah, with that, I think we can just go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Okay, so why are we here today? We're here today to articulate the set of principles that we have found have been incredibly helpful for building secure systems that measurably improve delivery speed. So, as Andrea said, you know, we have to be secure, we have to be compliant. That's our ticket to participate in the market, but it can't come at the expense of our ability to innovate and push our development needle forward. And so that's what we're here to do today. I guess the question to lead us in here is why change the system? So security is self-defeating right now, and the software delivery lifecycle is gaining friction. Andreas, I know you kind of lived this experience, so why don't you sort of run this talking point if you don't
Yeah,
mind?
sorry. So yeah, this is a very interesting point because many organizations they require security or a good security posture to stay in business. So there is not an option for you not to be secure. This is not the case for all organizations, right? Depending if you are less regulated, you may have a weaker security posture, and that's fine. Not the case if you are a health tech, a fintech, or a public company, or even a startup that works with sensitive information. Your customers will require a higher security standard. So you need to be secure, or you can't stay in business, right? And with the regulation environment and the regulations around PII, we're seeing that more and more every company now is highly regulated, because if you store an email or a social security number, information, addresses, phone numbers, these were like basic information in the past, not anymore. And so when you start to deploy these controls, what we see is that you take a big hit with in the developer velocity. And so think about my personal experience with this problem, right? I was working at a very high growth startup doing super well. That company ended up selling for $1 billion a year ago. So I was there very early, and we were growing the team. I was one of the first engineers. I was very experienced with the platform, could be doing very strategic work. But as a member of the platform team, at some point, I was spending more than roughly 50% of my time doing manual work. Again, one of the most expensive resources in the organization when it comes to knowledge of the platform and the impact that could be made by the building strategic projects, driving strategic initiatives. I was basically doing manual work. And did this come from? From the security requirement. That was a fintech, so we were PCI compliant, and we could not just let people into our production environment, or developers could not. But we were building the software at a very high, fast pace, and so we would need people to see what the current state of production would be during incidents, right? Of course, we want to use logs, metrics, and traces. That's wonderful. You want to have that, but that's a reactive mechanism. You don't know before the incident happens what problems you need to have that tracing. And so at some time you're gonna need to break glass and get into production. And even further, right? Sometimes you need sanitized data that looks like production so you can test your test the code, particularly in a microservices environment. So you need to get a sense as to how production state looks like. And so these requests kept coming to me, and I would basically be pasting SQL queries in production and ensuring they were secure and reliable. And that was taking most of my time. So that's where actually it's one of the many examples that we hear from customers all the time. You have this very strategic, very expensive platform team that's doing work and with 50, 60% of their time that's not strategic. It's very basic copy and pasting because there are no tools that can basically grant the right level of access and have the right workflows so that developers can have the autonomy themselves. So the numbers here show exactly that, right? When you have that security posture, you're slowing down the engineering velocity. And at the end of the day, when you have this slower pace, this is going to impact your business numbers. So you're going to get higher churn rate. You're going to have this lower incident resolution timing, and that's going to basically get you to lose customers. And so that's how important that high security posture is, thinking with developer experience and velocity.
And I mean, you're a perfect example of this too. When when you see, like, yes, you guys, you played by the rules, you navigated the security, and you eventually churned because you wanted to start something that could solve this problem. You see people either play by the rules and suffer productivity numbers, or break the rules and then pay the consequences. When it comes to audit or retracing after an incident. So just wanted to highlight, these are serious metrics here that are solvable. So
Yep,
I guess our
100%.
our big takeaway here is that secure access has to be user friendly to be secure, because otherwise people are just going to keep obfuscating the controls. So how did we get here? This is something we call, this process is development by accretion. So when you look at your current security stack, you probably have some of these controls enabled, but they weren't meant to work together. They evolved to suit a specific need, and then they became, maybe by the next control, there's redundancies, or it becomes something that isn't necessarily as important. For example, like the VPN, as now we see on this far end here, as people work from home, the VPN, the company VPN becomes a less secure metric, or control. And so, we have to evolve our architecture, but no one's really taken this as a full layered, single, unified approach. It's been a lot of like piecemeal evolution and stitching things together. So we wanted to differentiate that. This is a essentially taking the compounding power of an efficient platform team, as denoted here, and you see like the amount of productivity that it's able to drive for developers here. This is sort of when you take the same engineers, but they are spending 50% of their time, as Andrios was, on access, then it compounds at a lower rate. Your platform gets less optimized over time, which has this effect of slowing down development. So, what may seem like a direct cost here actually has another cost incurred that is sort of a force multiplier effect of, not only am I losing out on 50% of my time as a platform engineer to build the systems that are going to shape how workflows execute, but the people that are going to be the end user of those systems are also going to suffer a much larger productivity hit because I'm outnumbered by them, and the infrastructure that I provision, that I create, and the controls that I put in place have to make them more effective as opposed to stalling their productivity. If anyone has any questions on this, also, we'd be happy to send out some of the information on this sort of compounding effect after the presentation. I don't
Yeah. And
see any.
I just wanted to add how important the data behind this graph is. So we're talking about like the reason why organizations would build and invest in platform DevOps, SRE teams is to make sure that one of the biggest reasons is developers' velocity, right? Of course, there are reliability when we talk about SREs, but sometimes this is a shared responsibility, even inside SRE or the DBRE teams, where they're not just ensuring reliability, but ensuring that the product velocity is good, that people can build, the development teams can build at a fast pace. And so, from a business perspective, right, the bottom line here being not having that platform team. So the velocity is pretty flat. As you layer the platform teams, the expectation is that you compound and you increase the speed over time because the teams are going to keep building new tools, new optimizations, new solutions. This is what these platform teams need to be working on, right? We all here actually should be spending most of our time in strategic initiatives, optimizing the product, giving more tools to developers so that they can securely build faster. And so any second that we spend manually doing any sort of operation, that's defeating this purpose. Because it manually doing something means that the velocity of developers are not increasing. Actually, we might be decreasing it because the time it takes for getting something manual executed, that's also blocking the developers that should be blocked by that manual process. So it's a very problematic process to have that platform team and not be working on very strategic initiatives.
Another way that this compounds is not just over time when the pain develops, something that multiplies with scale. So I just have a couple quotes here from conversations we've had with either prospects or customers, and this is, vocalizing the frustration that they feel day to day with, again, it's the same thing that Andreas was experiencing when he was the practitioner. It's like, hey, I know there's a better way to do this, and I'm wasting my valuable time and this company's time to do something that anyone can do on. So now, how do we build forward? That's really the focus of this webinar. Is like, okay, we've framed the problem. Now let's build this into the future. So DevExSec, what does that mean? So it's a principle set approach to how we engineer better systems for security and velocity. So our first principle here is proxy, don't necessarily replace. Keep the foundational infrastructure as is. Andreas, I know that this was an important piece when you built Hoop. I'd love to understand a little bit more about like why did this matter so much?
Yeah, so when you think about any sort of security tool deployment, and I'm sure everyone here today had the experience of, hey, we need to meet X security compliance requirement or fix our security posture. And so you deploy a new security tool and it completely disrupts the experience of users, whether that's developers or business users. So this is what we are used to. So anytime you think new security tool introduced, you think worst experience or making things harder. It's kind of already ingrained in our brains, but this is not true. Like it doesn't have to be like that. And so this is what this principle is about. How can we fix the security items, but not only be looking at security, but also the efficiency of the process and the how easy to use that is. And that's what platform teams are about. That's what DevOps is about. How can you remove friction? And so when we think about this access proxy, our goal is really like when we initially thought about this, what is the best experience possible when it comes to a developer connecting to any infrastructure resource? And the answer was to have nothing in the middle, to basically use as a developer whatever IDE or client I want to use and not have to deal with a security tool. So that's what we did here. We basically built this invisible proxy that actually makes it easier than not using Hoop for developers because you're gonna have to your SSO credentials automatically injected into your IDE. So you basically open your IDE and start working. So you don't have to worry about signing in. We do that in the background for you. So this is the kind of principle that, again, we don't see vendors looking at that. And then you have this challenge, right? You create this new interface that you have your hundreds of developers from the team having being forced into use a different interface that's not optimized, that's now hurting what? Velocity. That's what we are looking at. So making the workflows work well with this proxy approach, that invisible proxy, keeping the same interfaces is one of the key items that we see. One of the reasons we see our organizations with more than 1,000 developers deploying this tool in 2 weeks because there's no training needed. There's no setup. There's no like changing the endpoint images. It's basically all on the server side. You change a toggle, and now people are going through the solution. And so this is what this is about. And I think more and more we should be looking for vendors that are okay. So it sounds like you check a lot of security boxes for us, but what is the impact that your tool is going to have for our developer experience? How is that impacting our developer velocity? This is the kind of questions that we should be asking when we are engaging with vendors. Because if we look only at the security angle, we're going to break our velocity.
Completely agree. Which brings us to our second piece is, okay, how do we then make sure that, like, given the type of access that's needed, we enforce those security controls without incurring a bunch of additional overhead. So, the way that we do this, and I know that, there are a few different ways that people access infrastructure, but, we try to first define, like, what is the type of access that you need, and then how can we essentially streamline that access while making sure that everything is secure. And we found that developers, like, maybe they're using primarily read access, maybe there's some infrastructure teams going in with write access. And maybe, the product tool owner could be sometimes platform, DevOps, infrastructure. It falls under a few different buckets, sometimes security. Like, how do we give everybody the best experience for the type of access they need? Andreas, I don't know if you have anything you want to add on this piece.
Yeah, so a lot of these ideas came from like personal experiences and a lot of conversations with industry leaders. And so when we look at, let me ask everyone one question. Like when you think about the idea of not having, so why are we thinking about, even considering these systems to protect production? To make sure that production is not being accessed wrongly. So this is a question that I actually ask myself quite a lot because when I was leading these platform teams, I trusted our developers. So I would think like, hey, why can't I just give everyone access to production here? So when you look at this from first principles, what you realize is that there are two very simple problems, at least from a definition perspective. Now, the solutions are going to be a little bit more complex, but it boils down to two things. The first is you want to make sure that the data is secure, the sensitive data is secure. So, production, there could be a lot of sensitive data. And so, think about why you don't need the same level of protection in your development environments as you need in production. Well, that's because there are no sensitive data in development. It's all supposed to be synthetic data. And so it's fine. You don't need a very granular thing there. And the other reason why development is not so don't need all the controls from production is because it can't break the system. It can't impact customers. So there are no reliability risks in development that are impacting customers. And so these are the two main problems. if you solve these two things, right, in a production setting, you don't have to have all the blocks and bottlenecks that you would have. So this is exactly what we're talking about here. So when you break down two workflows for reads, that's where the sensitive data portion, data protection happens. And then for writes, where you're going to be looking at reliability controls, we built this very elegant solution, right? And so going back to that proxy idea, when a developer connects to a database, it doesn't matter if it's development, production, or whatever, our proxy is able to look at the contents, identify sensitive data in real time using machine learning, and return a synthetic version of that data in real time to developers inside their IDE. So that means that it's almost like you're getting a fresh version of production that's synthetic, no exposure of PII. So think about how much faster you can make development, how much more reliable the software will be because the code is being tested with data that is very close to production, but you're not exposing a single piece of sensitive data. Now, that's a very elegant solution for reads. But then writes, how can you make sure that someone is not running a delete without where clause? How can you prevent someone from accidentally updating all records of a table, right? You need someone with expertise in that domain to review that action before it takes place. And that, again, going back to that example where you would have platform teams manually executing things in production, right? When you look at the data of what are these types of executions, our data shows that 80% of the time we're going to be thinking about read access, which can be completely automated. And now for the remaining 20%, which are writes, which need that platform team overlooking, whether it's a Kubernetes operation, whether it's a database operation, an AWS operation, you need some reliability check performed by an expert in that domain before that thing can touch production, because that's a change to production that can disrupt things. So what we have here is we are the only solution, our proxy is the only solution that can get the action as the developer tries to execute it against the environment, stop it at our proxy before sending it to the environment, and getting a second pair of eyes to look at that. And so you can think about a leader reviewing it and a manager. And I have a personal story. So this feature was actually born from my personal experience. I was leading a platform team, and one day after lunch, we got an incident. So there were no, our services were all returning 500 errors. And then we all rushed into troubleshooting mode and incident mode, trying to figure out what was the problem. So we start looking at the load balancer logs to see where those requests were stopping, and everything seemed fine. We were considering like AWS is down maybe. So checking all the status pages for all the services that we used and looking at logs, and we couldn't find it. And after going very deep into the network stack, because these were like we had a lot of microservices, so we were trying to identify the layer at which it was happening. It seemed like something very horizontal. And so after like 20, 30 minutes of digging into logs, I realized that our Kubernetes pods were not there. So basically everything was working fine in the networking stack. Our application was actually missing, which was a hypothesis I would like, that was the last thing I would think about. And so it turns out that one of our engineers in the team accidentally deleted our production namespace for Kubernetes. Now, what was the problem here? Well, nobody should be able, even admins should be able to delete a production namespace without any prompts of confirmation, right? Now, you can easily think that you're pointing to dev environment and doing something, but you're pointing to production. So this is the kind of thing that Hoop is, again, transparently, that person needs to do that operation sometimes. But then in real time, we can identify, hey, looks like you're pointing to production. This is a very dangerous operation. Let me get a second pair of eyes before we can get that into the environment. So you're not blocking people from doing things. You're actually accelerating the workflow of reviewing and ensuring that operations are reliable before they get to production, right? So we can do two things here. So the guardrails would prevent the deletion in the first place. But if it's something that actually needs to run, you can have it reviewed by one or two different groups inside the organization very fast.
It's a perfect story for explaining what the function is here. All right, principle three, also very relevant. The guardrails that you just mentioned. I can sort of briefly run us through this piece here, but essentially the exact workflow that you just described, right? You have the command issued, and then if it's mechanically dangerous, you can get into in a second here the like, how does this actually work? But if the command is dangerous, it should be blocked. And if it's not dangerous, then it should be routed to approval. The main thing I want to point out on this slide is, this is where the session begins, right? Right before you gain access, typically. In most like PAM tools, or if you're running a script to add someone to a database, here's where like your access begins. And then this is an outage here, this dangerous operation, and this is an outage here, if this isn't blocked by the admin. So again, if you want to hop in quickly on like how specifically this works, but as a workflow, you're avoiding serious issues here. All right, can jump to the next one here. Principle four, and this is sort of what we were talking about earlier, right? It should be invisible. Security is is absolutely mission critical. Your compliance posture is mission critical. You can't do business without it, but it doesn't have to become the main piece of infrastructure that your developers are interacting with. It should become an invisible control. And this has been a huge piece for developer satisfaction scores, which we'll get into at a little bit afterwards, is when people get really unhappy when they feel like they can't do their job. I mean, if I had to request access to write on a Google Doc every time that I needed to, start brainstorming a draft, I would hate my work. But because because I have absolute certainty that my Google Docs aren't going to become broadcasted to the ether because of certain security controls that Google has in place, it makes me much more confident and much happier that I can let my ideas flow and get into a flow state that that isn't it's not hampered by someone looking over my shoulder and saying, hey, don't do this, or we need to control this, something like that.
Yeah, so I think again, I touched on this earlier, and we actually tried different approaches, and so we could see how changing the interfaces and like adding at the end of the day when you change an interface, the person may still have access or have the autonomy that they had before, but if now you have three steps before they can get to that action, well, everyone here working with SRE knows about the golden path and how the easiest way needs to be the right way if you want to get developers to adopt a certain behavior, right? And so you don't want to enforce best practices in the organization by forcing people and by creating processes. That's just a lazy approach to solving problems. You actually want to have an incentive for people to adopt something. So again, very important when having those vendor conversations, right? Hey, great, you're going to solve my internal platform solution, right? You're going to solve my service catalog problem. So these are all problems that we're thinking about now. How many like clicks we have right now? Like literally thinking about number of clicks. That's how, by the way, product teams think about this, right? And in a lot of ways, I see platform teams and DevOps really as product teams because you're building products and delivering them to your users, internal users, which are developers. So platform teams need to be thinking just like product teams. And guess what product teams does? Okay, here's our user journey. Here's all these steps that they have. And now here's how we are changing that user journey. And what are the impacts of that? How much training we need to do before everyone adopts? And we see all those stories about tools that get bought that never implemented because it's not because the team didn't have the time to set it up, it's because nobody wanted to adopt it. So we hear countless times here stories about companies spending millions of dollars to buy a traditional PAM solution to check the box for a compliance requirement. But then when you go and see, nobody's using that. You only have that as a box checked, and everyone is going directly into the database to do things in skipping the PAM tool because it's so hard to use and the experience is so bad. So really look for the experience. And again, that's a big principle that we run by here, and I think it's a big component of DevExSec.
All right, component five. This one's really more on an admin side. But essentially, like, if you have to write policies, masking policies, access policies for each individual resource, and you have 5,000 databases, it's going to be a long, long day. One of the things that we try to do and that is so important to DevExSec is like, again, if things become too difficult, they just won't get used or they won't be updated. And that's when you start to have people say, like, hey, can I just borrow your credential? I need to, run a quick operation. And then, the audit trail becomes useless. The security controls, maybe that person isn't supposed to see PII, and maybe they now do. And that's, a huge audit flag. So you see these compounding issues from inefficient systems. And a crucial part of DevExSec is how do we make these as simple as possible so that they can be applied, across the organization and actually adopted. Anything, Andreas?
No, I think that's on point. And again, like I keep bringing those customer stories, and I can't emphasize how important this is. And a customer story that comes to mind is a public, very large organization, thousands of developers, and they have like hundreds of cloud accounts and thousands of databases distributed across these. And so they had been trying to write least access policies for these databases for roughly 3 years. And so they had a whole team that was scanning their databases and looking for all the PII and writing database like Postgres, MySQL, SQL Server roles and attributing those roles to the right development teams that owned each resource. So they had thousands and thousands of policies, but it was a never-ending job because anytime they got close to scanning 30% of the infrastructure, it had already grown by 30% because people kept adding new resources and databases and tables. And so when they started, one of the big reasons for them to adopt Hoop is the automated policy component. So instead of writing those policies inside your database engine, what we do is basically you define a very high level policy saying, hey, I don't want people reading credit cards or emails from this database. We are basically identifying which columns are sensitive, have that information, redacting it, and sending a sanitized synthetic version to the user on the fly. So that means that not only you don't have to write those policies, but basically putting this thing in production takes 30 seconds. You basically connect to the database through the Who proxy. No sensitive data is coming out anymore. And so you don't need to write policy. You don't need to know anymore which columns are sensitive in your database because we are going to find that out for you. The same goes for dangerous operations, right? Like which operations, and when you think about a large enough organization, you would have 10, 15 database technologies. Each of them have different concepts about what is role level, access control, column level, what is a dangerous operation, different syntaxes, the different versions. We find that out on the fly. So you can grant that right access. Of course, you can get a human to review, but if it's a very dangerous operation that gets past the human review, we're going to identify it and block it before it touches production. So that's how important that is because you can have 1,000 databases and with two roles for these databases, you solve the whole least access problem. And so this is a very, very new approach to this problem that is making waves because, again, it's a problem that no tool today can solve, and it's being solved very elegantly today.
All right. Coming up on our last few here. Audit ready by default. I think this one's fairly self-explanatory. It's crucial that, when it comes time for audits, You're not like, okay, shoot, now we have to figure out exactly who accessed what using whose credentials, what did they see, what did they write. We believe that, and I think this is, becoming increasingly standard, but um, we should capture all of that information as a routine part of access. And there are a few great solutions doing this as well. We didn't invent this principle, but again, it's you should never have to firefight to meet your PCI compliance. And that's a belief that we hold, affects the developers because they shouldn't feel like they're breaking the rules as they're gaining access, and the admins too, because they shouldn't feel like their life is defined by meeting a compliance standard quarterly or yearly, whatever the case may be for the standard. This should all be done automatically.
Yep.
And
Um,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, just two quick questions here that we have, and maybe we get to them because these are short. We can get to the larger ones later. But IO twice is asking how can I use Hoop to manage my ClickHouse clusters? And the answer is just like you would do for any other database technology. So you can put ClickHouse behind Hoop, and folks would access ClickHouse with the same interfaces that they use today, but with all those features enabled. Again, that's the principle of transparency that we have inside DevExSec, and we are applying it to whatever data warehouse. We have a lot of customers using ClickHouse, BigQuery, Redshift, and this is very much supported. And the other is how is Hoop different from PAM, like Delinea, CyberArk, Beyond Trust? And very short answer too. I would say from everything that we talked about here, about those principles that are part of our product, so in-transit data identification and sanitization, uh, action level approval, risky operations identification and blocking with live guardrails. Well, the list goes on. None of these are available with any of those other PAMs. So when we think about PAM, we see PAM as really a very basic layer that's basically securing access and recording and making sure that you have access groups automatically provisioning in the provisioning. So this is what you would get with a traditional PAM tool. And that's our open source version. We don't even commercialize that because we built this whole new foundation that lets us, on top of these standard PAM things, add way more value to the organization. Basically, automate the next problem that you have. Because guess what you need to do after you deploy a PAM tool? What is the very next problem? Is authorization, right? PAM is solving a lot of the authentication problems, but then to get PAM to do authorization, well, you need to write a lot of policies and very granular policies so that PAM it depends on policies written in your backend systems. That's not the case for Hoop. We can do authorization without relying on pre-existing granular roles. We're gonna automate the policy writing for you. And so that's the biggest difference for me. And just a new one came up. But yeah, it's definitely doing all things PAM do. As I said, PAM is actually our free tier. It's open source. You can use it and you're gonna get enterprise version of many PAM tools for free with our open source. And then the other stuff is just solving the very next problem after you deploy a PAM tool.
Which I think sort of brings us perfectly to this last principle here, which I have to disclaimer, this is like a buzzy term, but essentially what Andreas was saying, authentication versus authorization. And I'm gonna pass this back because you definitely explain this better than I do.
Yeah, so when you think about authorization, and particularly for the operations that are not the standard read operations, right? Let's say you have an incident and you need a break glass just-in-time session in production. So what the best PAM solution exists in the market right now is going to give you is a just-in-time session for an admin role where a developer or whoever is working on the incident gets into the environment and maybe they get 30 minutes or 15 minutes or 3 hours to work on the incident inside the environment. And that's what the market right now, before Hoop came up, was considering least access, right? But that's not enough in our vision. And if you really want to get DevExSec, least access is a whole new level. And so the most granular or the least amount of access you can grant to a sensitive environment is actually authorizing someone to run an action, not giving them a period of time, which we also do, by the way, also available in our free version. But what really stands out here is you give the freedom of the developer to write and to run any operation that they need. So it's the most administrative level of permission because there is an incident, systems are out, you need to fix it fast. And so you want to have autonomy and you don't want to run at the problem of, okay, let's create our just-in-time approvals here or elevated permissions that are just in time. Let's not make it too permissive because we don't want to run the risk. And then developer can't fix the problem. So now you have a second problem, which is widening the permissions before you fix the incident. I've seen that happen countless times with our customers. So with Hoop, you can actually have the highest like admin root access, but people can't run that directly. They're going to come up with a script, they're going to verify it in different environments. And when they run it, we're going to very quickly get domain experts from your team to review that action before it takes place in production. And so those teams can be across different countries in this remote world. Someone in India or in Europe can fire up a new query for a very sensitive resource. Someone in the US would get a real-time alert in Slack or Teams or whatever system with the code that can review from their phones on the street and approve it, and then the team on the other side of the world can continue. And so this is actual list access, but it's actually a faster way. It actually solve incidents faster than with the previous and legacy solution of time-based access that basically slows you down and gives you more risks and more permissions than needed into your environment.
Well done. All right. And then as far as taking these principles and applying them into the real world, what is the business value driven from DevExSec? One of the first things that we would check off the box is like, hey, your developers, this is a statistic, 30% of developers' time during the software delivery lifecycle is spent waiting for access. Could be navigating any sort of number of the different access layers, but because we're able to automate the read access and provide one-click approvals for the write access, immediately you get essentially asymptotically approaching 30% more development time per cycle and per developer. And then fewer change failures. Because we sanitize or because we redact the sensitive information and provide you production-like data, when people are building and testing, they experience fewer change failures as a result, because the data is so much more like what they're actually going to be deploying it into. And then to this second part here, faster recovery. I mean, we've been touching this the entire session, but it's about like okay, the incident happened. Let's roll back. Let's point to the problem and immediately recover as fast as we can. We got to protect our uptime. And because each command, each update executes one at a time with full context into each log, into each action, instead of going back through a 30-minute or hour or 4-hour session. The exact command that broke production, and you can just roll right back and begin work as usual. And then this last part is really like, this is where we land the plane. Developer happiness. This is something that is hard to qualify, or hard to quantify, except for in these survey results. You want to just feel like you're doing a good job at work, and you want to work in a system where you are actually free to do your job. And when there's a business part of this too, right, where 80% of or 81% retention. It's an improvement in retention over like tools that maybe they wouldn't have selected or they didn't want to adopt. This is you incur massive costs on HR, on training, and then when people start to actually provide value to the platform, it takes time. And but if you are able to retain your experienced developers, then you don't have to keep upskilling, and you save time.
Yeah, so I think that that's yeah, the numbers that we see when we apply these principles are just mind-blowing, right? And so when you take that manual tap toil out of your platform team, you actually recover not just time that the platform team will be doing strategic work, but each developer is getting back hours per week because now they're not waiting in the queue anymore to get something out of production. And again, goes back to velocity, right? And so faster development cycles, faster product velocity, faster incident resolution. So thinking about developer experience in the context of security is one of the biggest levers you can pull when it comes to developer velocity and one of the least looked places for optimizations today. And we're seeing massive results with the enhancements that we're bringing to these organizations right now.
So here's another one. Again, sort of just how do we get back to uptime faster? And then this is the developer experience KPI that I mentioned earlier. That's it's typically survey based, but we've seen legitimately 60% improvement for those developer satisfaction scores when measured at baseline as well as at the end of a trial period or after the first year of usage. And then the last one here, I think this is a statistic that speaks for itself, or a few statistics that speak for themselves. So I'm just going to give people a second to read that on their own.
Cool. And cool, I think we are almost at the top of the hour, so I don't think we're gonna be able to do the demonstration, but I think what we can do is send everyone that joined here a recorded version of what this looks in practice so that you can have a look at it and have it working for your environment if you want.
And yeah, lastly here, if any of you guys would like to hop on a demonstration and see the product in action, this QR code down here at the bottom will take you to a meeting page, and we'd be happy to walk you through how you can implement meaningful change today. All right.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining and sticking for even more time than we projected, but we got a little too excited here about these topics. We are super excited about it, and yeah, glad we could share a little bit. And please drop us any feedback if you think about anything later that we didn't cover or you wish you had seen. Let us know. We'd love to improve for the next one, and we wait for you in the next one as well.
We have one last question here. Do we have a Discord channel?
That's good. We do not. Right now, we use GitHub discussions as our community channel. So if you want to talk to us, you can just drop a comment there, or team will jump right into it.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for coming, everybody. And keep spreading the good word about DevExSec. Now you know the principles. Time to put them into practice. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.